Welcome to Module 2 of the Mandated Abuse and Neglect Prevention, Critical Incidents, and Human Rights Training, which should be taken annually by all staff. This module will cover the reporting policy for suspected abuse and neglect. Training overview. Be prepared to adjust the volume on your computer to listen to this training. To enable closed captioning, please press the CC button in the bottom left or right of your video display screen. The learning path contains multiple components in the form of video and quizzes. To be marked complete for this training, must complete all modules and pass all quizzes in addition to completing the final attestation form and mandatory report sign-off. This module will cover a review of the reporting agencies, understanding the written reporting policy, a review of the Abuse Investigation Division Leader and Liaisons, and an overview of the DDS Abuse Registry. Before we begin, a reminder that you are a mandated reporter. This is a requirement of your job at DDS and for every person providing support to individuals funded by the department. Regardless of your title, you are a mandated reporter. That means reporting abuse or neglect 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not just when you are at work. This is not an option to report abuse and neglect if you witness, you are informed of, or suspect it is taking place. As a mandatory reporter, your failure to report suspected abuse and neglect can be reported as neglect itself and may lead to progressive discipline. Any and all types of discipline may be considered depending on the severity of the abuse and neglect that was not reported. To elaborate on the Connecticut General Statute 46A-11B, there must be reasonable cause to suspect abuse or neglect is taking place. The reporter should be prepared to explain a reasonable cause to AID Central Intake and other agencies as necessary as to why they think there was abuse and neglect. If you see it, suspect it, or hear about it, or have reasonable cause to believe abuse and neglect is taking place, the first thing you should do is stop it, intervene, and protect the victim. Make sure the person receives any medical attention needed and be supportive. Be kind, compassionate, and caring. And critically important is to report it. On the screen throughout today's training, you will see a phone number for AID, the Abuse Investigation Division. This is the central intake number to call and report abuse or neglect, which we will discuss later in this module. Abuse and neglect reporting. Who, when, why, and where should we call? As of January 1st, 2022, DDS has a centralized intake within the department. Though there are other considerations, all suspected abuse and neglect should be reported to AID, the Abuse Investigation Division. There are also 3 other agencies to consider if there is reasonable cause to suspect abuse and neglect has occurred. Those agencies include DCF, the Department of Children and Families, DSS, the Department of Social Services, and DPH, the Department of Public Health. As we just discussed, there are several different agencies that may collect and investigate reports of abuse and neglect. However, all reports must go to the DDS Abuse Investigation Division, also known as AID. They serve as a central intake for DDS for reports for abuse and neglect of individuals with intellectual disabilities. Additional reporting agencies may be required to call based on the victim's age or the location of the incident. These reporting agencies include Department of Children and Families, DCF, Department of Social Services, DSS, and the Department of Public Health, DPH. And lastly, DDS regional liaisons can be called for suspected abuse and neglect that the AID does not accept for any reason. Some locations we work may be providing support and services to children or adults ages 18 to 21 who may receive DCF services. If there is a child victim, you must report to the DCF, Department of Children and Families. That number to call is 1-800-842-2288. In addition to calling DCF, you must also call AID, the Abuse Investigation Division, for children or adults with intellectual disability ages 18 to 21 and who receive DCF services. You will need to make 2 phone calls. If you have reasonable cause to suspect abuse and neglect of a child, a victim under age of 18, or an individual who is 18 to 21 and receives DCF services, you must report to DCF within 12 hours. DCF also requires additional form to be completed. This is DCF 136 form, which needs to be filled out within 48 hours of your call. You can find the 136 form on the DCF website. And remember, it is important to also report to AID after DCF has been notified. If the victim of suspected abuse and neglect has an intellectual disability or any persons who receive services from the Department of Social Services Division of Autism Spectrum Disorder and is between the ages of 18 to 59 years of age, suspected abuse or neglect should be reported to AID, the Abuse Investigation Division. This is for any type of abuse, physical by nature, sexual, psychological, verbal, or financial exploitation. AID should also be called to report neglect. AID's central intake number is 1-844-878-8923. Many of the people we support are elderly individuals. If you have reasonable cause to suspect abuse or neglect of any kind, and the victim is 60 years of age or older, this must be reported to the Abuse Investigation Division and to the Department of Social Services. The phone number for DSS is 1-888-385-4225. In case of abuse and neglect for seniors, you'll need to make 2 calls, one to AID and another DSS. The alleged abuse and neglect occurs at a medical facility or in a setting where the provider is licensed by the Department of Public Health. The reporter should notify the Abuse Investigation Division and either the DPH facility, licensing and investigation section for all allegations related to a medical facility, or to the DPH practitioner, licensing and investigation section for allegations related to licensed professionals. It is important to remember that all ICF and IID facilities are DPH licensed facilities. These would include STS, LFC, NWC, HRC, and some CLA settings across the state. If abuse and neglect occurs in one of these settings, 2 calls must be made. And remember, if individual is under 18 or over 60, DCF or DSS will also need to be called. In some instances, if abuse and neglect occurs in a DPH medical facility or by a licensed professional, 3 calls may need to be made to properly report abuse or neglect. It is your responsibility to report allegations of abuse and neglect to the appropriate place, depending on the age of the victim and the location. The person who has a reasonable cause to suspect abuse and neglect should call the designated agency or agencies. The report should be done as soon as possible, ideally before the end of your shift. Next, the reporter should notify their supervisors that a report of abuse and neglect has been made. If the supervisor is not available or you have reported to your supervisor of abuse and neglect, follow the chain of command. For example, report this to your supervisor's supervisor. Once a report has been made to the appropriate agency or agencies and the supervisor has been notified, they should then provide a written statement per the Connecticut Statute 46A-11B. A 255 incident form should be completed for the DDS employee or employees of DDS-funded agencies. Section 2B of the 255 form should be marked as Other and written in as unusual incident for verbal and psychological abuse, as well as financial exploitation. While the Connecticut statute states that you have 5 calendar days to complete the written report, DDS employees and funded agency employees should complete the 255 form by the end of the shift, especially if the report was made at an ICF facility. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services requires investigations to be completed within 5 days. To reiterate, best practice would be to always complete all reporting, verbal and written, by the end of your shift. When making a report, you are expected to be truthful and cooperative. It is important to keep the report confidential and do not talk about the allegations with other coworkers or individuals. It is also important that if any medical or personal information needed by a doctor, investigator, or supervisor, you should do this through fax or encrypted email only to protect the confidentiality of the individual. Lastly, it is very important to let the investigator do their jobs. After making the report, it is not your job to do the investigation. If you are ever unsure about a situation, you can call your regional liaison for guidance. Can you report anonymously? Yes, you can report anonymously. If you choose to do so, it is important to identify yourself as a mandated reporter who wishes to remain anonymous. Make the report immediately or before the end of your shift. Be clear and detailed in the information you are providing to the investigator. Anonymous means that your name will be kept out of the investigation, except where disclosure is otherwise required by law. The reporter must complete a written report as follow-up after calling the appropriate agency or agencies. 255 form shall be used by all DDS employees and private provider employees. PA6 form should be used for the written report if the report was made by an individual that is not a DDS employee or a DDS-funded private provider. While it is okay to report anonymously, please remember that if you do so, the reporter does not know the appropriate names of people to interview. It could drastically impact the investigation process. It is encouraged to provide your name for follow-up, but you are not required to do so. The best practice, whether reporting anonymously or providing your name, will be to always complete all reporting by the end of the shift. A few things to keep in mind when calling AID. You must speak to an investigator to make an official verbal report of suspected abuse or neglect. Leaving a voicemail does not complete your responsibility as a mandated reporter. If you leave a message and do not receive a call back within 1 business day, you should call again. Continue to call until you have received a return call or speak to someone directly. If you leave a message, you do not need to leave your name if you wish to remain anonymous, but you need to state that and that you are a mandated reporter who wishes to remain anonymous. If leaving a voicemail, you must leave a callback number. The AID phone system does not record phone numbers. The leaders of our investigative division are Kendra Slally, Director of Division of Investigation of Abuse Neglect Division, and John Collins, who is the lead investigator. Their contact information can be seen on the screen. For any report of abuse or neglect that AID does not accept for any reason, each region has its own regional abuse neglect liaison. If AID says something does not meet their intake criteria, don't give up if you feel it needs to be investigated. Make a follow-up call to your region's liaison. Liaisons are also available to you to answer any kind of questions you may have, to advise you on any situation of concern. In the North region is Sergino Walker, the South region is Tanya Pacheco, and the West region is Kenrick Brown. Their contact information is also displayed on the screen for you. Supervisors have additional responsibilities when a report of suspected abuse or neglect is made. However, it is not the job of the supervisor to make the report. As a mandated reporter, the person that witnessed or suspected abuse or neglect is responsible for making the report. The supervisor should assist the employee as needed with making the report. They cannot screen, evaluate, discourage, or refuse to allow you to file a report. When notifying the supervisor of the report that has been made, they must be aware of abuse that rises to the level of criminal activity and notify the police. Supervisors should assist the employee with their written follow-up and completing the 255 incident report. The supervisor should ensure that reporting employees get a copy of the 255 form. As we talked about previously, per the Connecticut Statute 46A-11B, all reports and allegations of abuse and neglect must be followed up with a written report within 5 days. That form should be used for all DDS employees and DDS private provider employees, is the Form 255. Here on the screen is the 255 form. It is also known as our incident reporting form. This form is to be used to report things like falls, bruises, and moderate or severe injuries. Other things that may be reported on the 255 are things like challenging or changing behaviors. It is used to document and track whether they are from accidents, unknown injuries, or suspected abuse or neglect. There are 4 major categories of incidents that are required to be reported to DDS: injuries, unusual incidents, critical incidents, and the use of restraints. If something that falls in one of these 4 categories occurs, it is your responsibility to complete this form. It is also your responsibility as a DDS employee or DDS private provider employee to complete this form as a follow-up written statement to the verbal report of abuse and neglect. If suspected abuse and neglect results in an injury, for example, if the abuse is physical by nature or sexual, then the injury should be noted on the form. If the suspected abuse and neglect is verbal, psychological, or financial exploitation that does not result in physical injury, other should be marked for abuse and neglect allegations under injuries. The portion of this form that is directly applicable to reporting suspected abuse and neglect is Section 3, which is circled on the screen. Here's Section 3 of the 255 form at a closer look. When you report abuse and neglect, it is important to capture the information in this section. You have several lines to state briefly the facts of the situation that you identified as abuse or neglect. If you need more than the 3 lines, you can use the back of the form to ensure you are providing full details. You will need to put your name and title. Check the abuse and neglect suspected box says yes. Include the date you called in your report and to which agency or agencies. Then sign the form. So things to remember when you are completing Section 3 of the 255 form are include only the facts in the comments area. Avoid adding your opinions. The back of the form can be used if you need additional space to report accurately the incident, injury, or suspected abuse, neglect that was reported. Remember that as a mandated reporter, you need to report if you have reasonable cause to suspect that abuse, neglect has occurred. You do not need to know for certain. The investigators will do a full investigation to determine if the case could be substantiated. If you have any questions or concerns, call the regional liaison. When a DDS employee or private provider employee uses the 255 as a written statement from follow-up of a verbal report of abuse and neglect that needs to be sent to AID. Their email is dds.aid@ct.gov. If the 255 was used to report an injury or incident, then it should be sent to the regional reporting team. Those email addresses, broken down by region, are displayed on the screen. If abuse and neglect is suspected and there is also an injury or incident, the 255 should be sent both to AID and the Regional Incident Reporting Team. Remember, all emails with medical or personal information should be sent encrypted for privacy. Per the Connecticut General Statute 46A-11B that we referenced before, it is a reporter's responsibility to provide a written statement after calling an agency or agencies to report abuse and neglect. That form can be used for a non-DDS employee or DDS-funded private provider employee is the PA-6 form. For example, if a family member, doctor, dentist, or bus driver calls to report an allegation of suspected abuse and neglect against a caregiver to an individual, to provide a written report as follow-up, they would use the PA-6 form. Here on the screen is what the PA-6 form looks like. Important parts of the PA-6 that should be completed when providing a written statement are the name, date of birth, address, and telephone number of the alleged victim of abuse or neglect, the date of the suspected abuse and neglect, the name of the suspected abuser, if known. The form should also include the reasons the reporter believes the victim to have an intellectual disability. This will be information supporting the victim's inability to protect themselves from abuse. Lastly, the name and address of the person reporting should be included, as well as a number where they can be reached. If the person wishes to remain anonymous, this form can be completed, and the reporter may fill in the agency name as opposed to their name and mark Y or N when asked if you wish to remain anonymous. This form should be completed whenever there is alleged abuse or neglect. If there is an injury or incident, the 255 must be completed in addition to this form. Once the PA-6 is completed, it should be sent to dds.aid@ct.gov within 5 business days of the verbal report being made. But best practice is to always do this by the end of your shift. Having a substantiated abuse or neglect complaint against you has severe consequences, one of which is your name being added to the DDS Abuse Registry. This is a confidential list of names that is accessible to employers licensed or funded by DDS for the strict purpose of making employment decisions. The DDS registry is not available to the public. If your name is added to a statewide abuse registry, you cannot be hired by DDS or an affiliated agency. A person whose name has been added to the list for substantiated abuse and neglect can appeal their name on the registry by writing to the commissioner no more than 5 years after the substantiated and 2 years after their name has been added to the list. A reason someone may appeal their name being added to the registry may be for unfair termination or for good cause shown. The DDS Commissioner's Office will make the decision if the person can be removed from the registry, considering the following, but is not limited to: the nature of the substantiated abuse and neglect, the length of time since the incident, the rehabilitation of the employee since the incident, and the likelihood that the employee will commit future acts of abuse or neglect on an individual with an intellectual disability. This training is the property of the Department of Developmental Services and is protected under state and federal law. This material cannot be altered unless permission has been granted by the Connecticut Department of Developmental Services or the third-party author. The information cannot be distributed for profit and should be used for training purposes only. Thank you for your time in completing this module. If you have any follow-up questions, please contact dds.training@ct.gov.